Hey everybody, today we are looking at Jeremiah chapters 46 and 47. Now this comes it's a really strange sort of end to Jeremiah because these are all sort of prophecies against the nations that probably happened earlier in Jeremiah's prophetic time. These actually happened before Babylon invaded Judah. And the people went into exile, and so they probably fit earlier in the story. But the people who compiled the book of Jeremiah decided that these prophecies concerning all of these nations surrounding God's people was fitting to put at the end. And today we're going to talk about why that is. So as you read through it, these are prophecies against all the surrounding nations. So here in chapters 46 and 47, we have prophecies against Egypt and against the Philistines. So these are two of Israel's most notorious enemies. So they were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years during the time of the Exodus. And the Philistines have been their continual enemies since they came into the Promised Land. And so these are, prophecies that are these kind of historical enemies. But then later chapters, chapters 48 to 51, are prophecies about all the other surrounding nations to Judah. And the question is, what is going on with these prophecies? And I think there are four things that we need to know about why this section is in here. The first one is I think what this is saying to us is that God is the ruler and judge over all the nations. Most of Jeremiah's work and prophetic nature is revolving around God's own people in the kingdom of Judah. And so most of his work is to speak God's words to God's people concerning their own kind of behavior, that they had followed other gods and walked away from God, and they were mistreating one another and doing all these terrible things, and they had come under God's judgment because they had broken their part of the covenant agreement to be God's people. So God said, if that's what you want to do, I'll let you go your own way. I'll give you what you want, a life without me. And that's what the majority of the prophets, especially Jeremiah, are trying to do, trying to remind people about this covenant, this promise, and God's greatness, that he loves them, and to turn back before it's too late. But the people keep saying, no thanks, we want to do our own thing. And so most of Jeremiah's work is toward his own people. But what this section, chapters 46 to 51 are all about is that God is not just the ruler and judge over his own people, but every nation, all the nations. God is the judge of the whole world. And he has something to say, not just to his own people, but to every people. So that's point number one. Point number two is this. Even though Judah and Israel are God's chosen people and they are held to a higher standard, they're the one that made this covenant promise with God, and they are held to a higher standard, all humanity is in fact held accountable to God's rule and design. It's not just God's people that are expected to live for God and to choose him and to treat each other with goodness and kindness and justice and generosity and all those things, but every human is held accountable to God. This is where Paul says in Romans that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It's not just those people who have this special relationship with God, the Jewish people, but all people are called into account for their actions, their attitudes, and the way that they treat one another, and they treat the earth, and that they treat God. And so all people come under God's rule and justice. And so if we violate that, well, we will face God's judgment as well. Number three of why this is in here, I think the message is, after all this prophecy that Jeremiah delivered to his own people, I think it's really easy for these surrounding nations to look at what's happening, to look at Jeremiah's words, and to gloat and think like, look at them. Look at what they've done. Their God has abandoned them, and we are better. We're the ones reigning and ruling supreme. Look at us. And they can easily just point the finger and laugh and gloat over Judah's misfortune. But what these prophecies concerning these nations are about is, well, don't get too full of yourself, because you are under God's judgment and rule as well. It's like when Jesus tells people to take the plank out of their own eye before they point at the speck in their neighbor's eye. It's really easy to do that, right? To look at other people and say, you have this issue and you have this problem, but we don't often look at our own reflection in the mirror and where we have gone wrong and where we have become sinful and broken. And so God reminds people, don't get too full of yourself, because you come under my judgment as well. And then lastly, all the nations are God's, and despite the collective sinfulness of the nation, that's what a lot of these prophecies are about these nations' own sinfulness, there will be a universal salvation that God provides. So yeah, judgment comes on God's people. It comes on every nation that rebels against God. And yet, that's not the end of the story. God is going to not just welcome his own people back and restore his own people, but God has a plan to save the whole world. You may know what that salvation is. We talk about it all the time, and I'll just leave that with you. But yeah, these are kind of the four reasons why these prophecies are in here. So as you're reading through the nitty-gritty and trying to understand what this is all about, I think those 4 points are really helpful for us to remember over these next couple weeks. That's all I got to say. We'll see you next time. Bye.